Hosted by newtotownJAM. Our story is called "The Previous Tenant of My New Flat Left a Survival Guide." Last night my survival was threatened. How the conversation went on, I was in complete shock. Looking at her. Prudence had a facial expression filled with guilt, and now I knew the truth. I could see it. The creature was exactly how Ian had described, except with wavy ginger hair and a sadness in its beady eyes. This abomination was Lila. This was how Prudence had bought her back, and this was the only way I would ever see Jamie again, a risk I wasn't going to take. After days of disbelief, the reality finally hit me like a ton of bricks. Jamie was dead and he wasn't coming back. "Why did you do this?" I asked, my voice shaking with horror. Prudence scowled at me, trying to mask her shame. "I didn't want this. If you think this was my aim, then you're sicker than I am. I just wanted my granddaughter back. When she died, a part of me died. My son blamed me, his wife blamed me, and although he never said it, I could see in Bernie's eyes that he did too. I'd pushed for her to stay. I wanted to spend more time with her. I got cocky about my ability to cope with the strange occurrences in the flats. I know what you must be thinking. But I swear I didn't know about the sleepwalking until it was too late. We had moved into the flat not long after my son left home to move in with his girlfriend. He's the youngest of three and was the last to fly the nest, so we downsized for the two of us. He never knew what we were facing in that flat, or the dangers that he sent his little girl into. When it happened, it was a few years after the fire and the troubles with the creatures. We'd struck the deal with the things in the lift, and the neighbors of the burned flats had become a fixture just like the other quirks. I really thought she would be safe. Prudence paused to gaze longingly at the mutated little girl in the cage. The creature just twitched. In return, it bared its 4 rows of teeth and made a gentle hiss. "But how did you do this?" I stopped her with more urgency this time, looking at Rat Lila in disbelief. I had to get answers out of her fast. I didn't want to spend any more time than was absolutely necessary in this shed. "The gardener helped me," she answered, her voice trembling. "Who the fuck is the gardener?" I grew more impatient with every new confusion she threw at me. The last thing I needed was something new and potentially malevolent in the mix. I didn't mention him in my note because he's been gone for over 20 years, he'll be of no concern to you, so don't worry. His damage is in the past now. Around the time Lila went missing, the council granted planning permission for the tower block next door. But before that was built, the land it sits on acted as a communal garden for ours and the neighboring tower block on the other side. It had a regular gardener named Derek who you would often see tending the flower beds out front. Derek was one of the first people I met when I moved in. Like I said, I had to work it all out myself, and the first time the window cleaner came to the balcony, I naturally reached to let him in and offer a cup of tea. As my hand applied pressure to the handle to open the balcony door, there was a knock at the front door. I made a gesture to the cleaner to indicate that I would only be a minute, and answered. There was Derek. He stopped me and told me not to let the man in, that I would be making a huge mistake. I thought he sounded crazy, and I told him so. After a while of arguing, I got up to reboil the kettle and let the man in, and Derek grabbed my hands and shouted at me to look at the man outside. When I turned to look, there was no man outside, but a monster. He was tall and impossibly thin, flesh and bones, but somehow thinner than bones, with graying skin stretched over them. He had eyes that seemed to be so deep set they went on forever, like the blackest cave you can imagine. Saliva dripped from his mouth and landed on my balcony floor, some sliding down the glass panel of the door. I opened my mouth to scream, but as I did, Derek let go of my hands and the monster was gone. In its place was that smug, friendly man, begging for a drink while he cleans the windows. It took me a minute to process it, but I know what I'd seen. That was the real window cleaner. I never intentionally opened or tried to open the door for him again. That day Derek didn't stay long. He didn't tell me what the window cleaner is, or why he visits every few days. He didn't explain anything about the weird things that go on. As much as Derek was a part of the strange happenings, he was like one that had been carved from light. He said that he'd always be around when I needed him, that it was his job to look after the residents just like the flower beds. Over the years he appeared a few times. He was instrumental in striking a deal with the creatures. When the neighbors died in the fire, he created a special display for them in the garden, and made sure that nothing planted was poisonous to the cats as soon as they arrived. He also stopped an imposter from killing Bernie at our front door. He seemed like such a good thing for the residents. Always there to help. Offer some gentle advice or a creative solution. Someone to be trusted. He changed when they granted planning permission for the other block though. He knew his garden would be dug up to lay foundations and his use is redundant. He became grumpy and bitter over time, but no one paid enough attention to notice. Especially not when my tragedy struck. When Lila died I was devastated. Derek appeared to me as I sat on a bench in the garden crying. He offered to help me, to use the garden to get her back. I snapped at him. I told him it was his fault and that he should have been there when it happened to stop them. He worked so hard on the agreement with the creatures, he spent a lot of time with them. Lila broke the rule and he had to allow them to do what had been agreed, he said. He couldn't have stopped them. But he wanted to help make things right. I understood why he hadn't intervened. But I couldn't accept it. I lashed out at him. I'm embarrassed to say I actually slapped the poor man along with stamping on his freshly planted flower bed. I was angry and grieving. I quickly burned myself out and collapsed into a blubbering heap on the floor. Derek attempted to comfort me but his mind was on his garden. He said he was sorry for my loss but I shouldn't have attacked the flower bed. That he'd always been nice to me and I should be kinder in return. I snapped and told him that it didn't matter because it was all about to be bulldozed in the next few days anyway. I should have taken more note of the way he twitched as I said that. He snapped. He said that he knew I was angry. But there was no need to take it out on him. If I was that desperate to get Lila back he knew a way. But it was dangerous. I begged. Anything I said. I would do anything. He told me it was simple and that all I had to do was enter the lift and offer the creatures some food whilst repeating the phrase revertet or mortuis during their frenzied hours. He said that there was no guarantee they wouldn't be crunching on my bones before I even got the first word out but that if I succeeded I would have Lila back. Of course, it was successful. There wasn't a creature inside as I performed the ritual as instructed. I thought nothing happened at first. She didn't appear straight away. But a few days later I found her running round inside my house. She'd taken a chunk out of Damon's ear with her teeth. I tried to kill her at first, but just as I was about to finalize it I saw in her eyes who she was. I tried to look for Derek but by that point the workmen had started. Nothing was left of his garden, and nothing was left of Derek. No one's seen him since. You see, Cat, nothing in that building is totally harmless. You have to be on your guard at all times. I've kept her like this ever since. You may think I'm crazy but I couldn't kill my own granddaughter. I'm not a monster. Prue sighed and ushered me back out of the shed. She locked the door behind us, closing the padlock on her most hideous secret. I was exhausted. It was a lot of information to take in and as a result of the information I'd received, real grief for my boyfriend was finally settling in. Every hope I had was dashed. I know many of you tried to tell me in the comments that he was gone but I wanted you to be wrong so bad. I couldn't bear to look at Prudence Hemmings for another moment. I made my excuses and left, morosely riding the bus back to the tower block I had once been so excited to live in. It was mid-afternoon by time I got home. The choice between the stairs and lift didn't strike much enthusiasm into me but I opted for the stairs, and after what I'm sure ended up being 11 flights, I made it the 6 flights up the stairs to my flat. I laid on our mattress on the floor and sobbed for Jamie. I sobbed so hard my throat went dry and hurt and my stomach cramped with each gasping breath. I sobbed myself to sleep. My body and mind must have given up fighting the need to rest and shut down. When I woke up it was late, about 10 p.m. I wrote as much of my update as I could for you guys, hit post and just sat at the dining table with my head in my hands. My whole life had fallen to shit and I knew it. I thought about so many things, questioned why they were happening to me. I searched social media for updates on Georgia but there were none. Jamie wasn't super close with his family but I knew it wasn't long before they'd start to worry. Everything I considered just snowballed in my mind. The loneliness in dealing with this situation was killing me. I decided to do something I usually wouldn't. I went downstairs and I knocked on the door of flat 26. Terry answered. Her perfectly bobbed hair was a little unkempt and out of place. She had huge bags under her eyes and I could smell wine on her breath. "Are you okay, Cat?" She looked concerned. I found it ironic that she looked so disheveled I had forgotten it was me who came for help. I'm sorry, I know I don't know you, I could barely speak." "Don't worry." Prue called me. She told me everything. "I'm sorry about your boyfriend, it's a shame I never got to meet him." Terry stared back at me with the same expression a mother would, warm and understanding. "Would you like a cup of tea, maybe something stronger?" "I'd love a coffee please," I answered meekly, making way into the living room. Her sofa was comfy. It reminded me of being back home at my parents' before any of this started. Terry trotted out to the kitchen, stumbling slightly. I could see the kitchen counter from the sofa, and the empty bottle of wine that accounted for her stumbling. As she boiled the kettle, there was a huge crash from somewhere inside the flat. I jumped, feeling startled. Terry coughed in a meager attempt to conceal the noise. "Excuse me for just a moment please," she muttered apprehensively as she walked out of the living area and into the hallway containing the bedrooms. I heard another crash, giggling and some inaudible shouting. After a while things went quiet and Terry came back into the living room. "Sorry about that, kids, she announced, brushing off the noises. I'd almost forgotten about Eddie and Ellie. It was late already, and by the resigned expression on Terry's face indicated that this was how all her nights began. I nodded. I couldn't muster up much more of a response. I think she could see that I just needed to sit there. She got up to finish making and then set the cup of tea in front of me with 2 digestive biscuits. I hadn't eaten properly in days and I really needed the sugar. It turned out me and Terry get along really well. We have similar taste in movies, music and food despite the age gap. We spoke for about an hour about random, normal stuff. It was nice to get a break from the madness. I got used to the crashing around from the twins. I even laughed a few times. I'd forgotten what that felt like these past few days. The break didn't last long. The next noise that we heard was louder than the first. It was quickly followed by 2 small children, running into the living room, diving into their mother's arms. I was taken aback for a moment. Eddie and Ellie were dressed in pajamas, and were still the cute children that I had met in the hallway, but something was different. Their brown puppy dog eyes had become deep voids, like what I'd imagined when Prue described the window cleaner's true form. And at the ends of their fingers were long sharp claws protruding from where nails should be. I didn't have time to recoil in terror at their new looks. Terry clutched them and asked what was wrong. They wailed and buried the voids where their eyes should be into their mother's shoulders. Despite their terrifying exterior, these were 2 very scared little kids. It had been a very long day and I thought my nightmare was over, but it was only just beginning. Ellie mumbled into Terry's shoulder, in that high-pitched voice kids do when they're scared. "Mummy, we're sorry, we didn't mean to let them in. We were just teasing. Shh, they're coming," hissed Teddy, in the same distressed high-pitched tone. What have you done?" Terry asked, color drained from her face. The kids didn't get a chance to reply. Terry's face turned paler than I thought possible. I looked up and standing in the living room doorway were about 10 people, all incredibly average looking. They were almost expressionless. They didn't look angry or pleased to see us. They were dressed in non-descriptive clothes. I imagined trying to describe them to one of those artists that draws pictures for the police, and I genuinely don't think even one of them had a distinguishing feature. That's why it took me a while to spot her in the crowd, even though she had been glaring at me the entire time.
Natalia.